Jasmine Carter, a 17-year-old, was humiliated at O'Hare Airport when Officer Reynolds singled her out for extra screening, treating her with suspicion for no reason. His smug, dismissive attitude made her feel powerless, turning a routine day into a public ordeal. But when a supervisor discovered her identity as the daughter of FAA head Marcus Carter, the tables turned and accountability began to take hold. Just wait until you see how the story unfolds and why justice finally prevailed against this blatant injustice. It was a typical Friday morning at O'Hare International Airport, the kind of morning where the airport hummed like a living organism. The clatter of rolling suitcases echoed against polished floors. Announcements crackled over the loudspeakers, and the smell of coffee and pastries hung in the air. Among the stream of travelers weaving their way to gates, 17-year-old Jasmine Carter moved with the lightness of someone finally heading home after a long week. Her backpack bounced gently on her shoulders, earbuds in, playlist humming softly in her ears. She had imagined the weekend already, sleeping in, catching up with friends, and sharing laughter over her favorite diner pancakes. But all of that vanished in an instant, replaced by a knot of unease that settled in her stomach as she approached the security checkpoint. She had passed through security countless times before, and the routine felt familiar. Place the bag on the conveyor, remove her shoes, belt, and jacket, step through the scanner, but today was different. Officer Reynolds, a middle-aged man with a precise, rigid posture and sharp eyes, singled her out almost immediately. "Step aside," he barked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a sudden alarm. It was not a friendly or professional tone. It was a command that carried the weight of accusation. Jasmine froze for a moment, confusion flickering across her face. Why her? There was nothing in her behavior, nothing in her appearance that should have drawn attention in this ordinary, bustling morning. As she obeyed, a line of passengers behind her watched, curiosity or perhaps impatience etched on their faces. The officer gestured for her to place her backpack on a separate table. Her stomach tightened as he began rifling through her things, not gently, but with an intrusive, almost accusatory force. Every pocket opened, every item examined with scrutiny she had never experienced before. Her notebooks, pens, and carefully folded hoodie were treated as if each were a potential threat. The more he rummaged, the deeper the flush of humiliation burned in her cheeks. She felt stripped of her privacy, reduced to a list of objects under suspicion. Jasmine's heart pounded. Anger bubbled inside her, sharp and immediate. She wanted to speak up, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say that would make a difference in a situation so clearly lopsided? The officer's eyes never left her, scanning her as though her very presence warranted suspicion. And yet, it was obvious. There was no real cause, no logical reason. The weight of injustice pressed down on her chest. It wasn't just that she had been stopped, it was the reason behind it, the silent assumption that someone like her might be a threat simply because of the color of her skin. Her fists clenched at her sides, knuckles whitening. Every nerve in her body screamed that this was wrong, that the moment should be met with outrage. She could feel the gazes of other travelers, some sympathetic, some impatient, some barely noticing at all, and it stung even more. This was public humiliation, a spectacle imposed upon her with no provocation. Her mind raced. Why me? Why now? I've never done anything to deserve this. The unfairness of it cut sharper than the chill of the airport air conditioning. Yet beneath the humiliation, the anger grew. It was hot, raw, and undeniable, a fire that demanded recognition. Jasmine wanted the world to see the injustice of this act, the needless cruelty of it. She would not let this pass quietly. The officer continued his examination, oblivious to the storm building inside her, and Jasmine endured each second, her emotions shifting from confusion to indignation, from disbelief to a simmering, undeniable rage. In that crowded terminal, amid the noise and the movement of countless travelers, Jasmine Carter experienced a profound, unmistakable truth. Injustice could appear anywhere, and sometimes it came for you when you least expected it. By the time the search ended and she repacked her belongings, her anger had not dissipated. If anything, it had crystallized, a promise forming silently in her mind that she would not remain powerless, that this moment of humiliation would not define her. Today she had been singled out, belittled, and disrespected. But tomorrow she would find a way to confront it. For now, all she could do was stand, take a deep breath, and move forward, every step carrying the weight of her righteous fury. Jasmine's hands trembled as she tried to zip her backpack closed, the straps tangling in her flustered fingers. The small items she had meticulously packed, her notebooks, pens, and a cherished journal, were scattered across the security table, some falling to the floor. Each movement felt heavy, mechanical, as if her body carried the weight of the humiliation she had just endured. Around her, the terminal buzzed with its usual activity, travelers moving with purpose, oblivious to the storm that had struck her world in those few minutes. Her friends had already passed through, laughing lightly as they walked toward their gate, leaving her alone in a sudden, piercing isolation. The laughter she had anticipated for her weekend now felt impossibly distant, replaced by a quiet, aching embarrassment that settled deep in her chest. Officer Reynolds didn't offer a word of apology. Instead, his lips curved into a smirk, and he muttered casually, "Next time, don't look suspicious." The words hit her like a cold, sharp wind, slicing through her composure. It wasn't the searching or the questioning that stung the most. It was the suggestion that she had somehow invited this treatment, that her presence alone had made her guilty of some unspoken offense. Jasmine felt her chest tighten, an invisible pressure pressing against her ribs as the helplessness settled in. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, to make someone in that bustling terminal see the injustice, but no words came. All she could do was gather her belongings, feeling smaller with each passing second. Her mind flashed to her father, Marcus Carter, a man whose reputation in aviation preceded him. As head of the Federal Aviation Administration, he had spent decades ensuring the safety of air travel and building a legacy of integrity and fairness. She had grown up hearing stories of his meticulous attention to detail, his commitment to rules that protected everyone equally. And yet, none of that mattered in this moment. No title, no influence could shield her from the casual cruelty of one individual's bias. The contrast struck her sharply, making the sting of humiliation even deeper. Here she was, the daughter of a man who had dedicated his life to justice in the skies, brought low in a crowded airport terminal simply because of who she was. Every passing second amplified the emotional toll. Her pulse throbbed in her temples, a mixture of lingering anger and creeping despair. She felt exposed, as if the world had suddenly decided she was a target rather than a traveler, as if the security checkpoint was a stage, and she the unwilling performer in a scene scripted by prejudice. The injustice felt systemic, ingrained, not just the act of one officer, but a reflection of the subtle ways assumptions about identity could manifest in everyday spaces. Each glance from a passerby, each indifferent shrug, reminded her of her vulnerability. She had been judged without cause, reduced to an object of suspicion, and the unfairness was suffocating. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. She had always thought of herself as resilient, capable of weathering challenges, but the emotional weight of this encounter pressed relentlessly against her. It was not merely embarrassment, it was the realization that the world could turn on her in moments she least expected, that the assumptions of others could overshadow her character and intentions. Jasmine's thoughts circled uncomfortably. The anger from the first encounter had been raw, immediate, almost physical. Now, the pain was quieter, more insidious, threading through her mind with every step, leaving a mark that went beyond the surface humiliation. As she slung her backpack over her shoulder, she felt the ache of isolation deepen. Her friend's laughter faded into the distance, a stark contrast to the cold indifference she had faced. And yet, beneath the shame and hurt, a quiet awareness began to form. This moment, though painful, revealed the stark reality of injustice, the vulnerability inherent in being singled out for reasons she could not control. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and undeniable, but it was also a truth she would carry forward, a seed that, though small now, might grow into the determination to confront and challenge such inequities in the future. For now, though, Jasmine walked toward her gate, heart heavy, hands trembling, and a mix of sorrow and indignation simmering beneath the surface. Jasmine was halfway down the terminal corridor, her backpack heavy on her shoulders, when a presence pulled her attention back. A man in a crisp uniform approached, clipboard in hand, and an air of authority that instantly demanded respect. He was a supervisor, she realized, someone whose role was to oversee the procedures and personnel at the security checkpoint. There was something in the way he carried himself, calm, observant, deliberate, that made Jasmine pause. Her earlier anger had dulled into a simmering exhaustion, but now a flicker of curiosity stirred. Perhaps, she thought, someone here could finally see what had happened. She stopped, keeping her posture straight despite the lingering tremor in her hands. The supervisor's gaze swept over her, slow and deliberate, taking in her stance, her calm yet firm demeanor, and the subtle tension in her expression. Jasmine's voice, steady despite the turmoil she had endured, broke the silence. "I believe I was unfairly targeted," she said quietly, but with unmistakable conviction. Her words carried neither accusation nor pleading, only an unwavering statement of truth. For a moment, the supervisor merely looked at her, silent, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny. Each second stretched long, her pulse racing as she wondered if anyone in this busy terminal would acknowledge the injustice she had faced. Then, almost casually, she added, "My name is Jasmine Carter." Her tone was calm, but there was a precision to it, a clarity that demanded recognition. The supervisor's eyebrows rose slightly, and he leaned in to glance at her boarding pass, scanning the name. "Carter?" he murmured, more to himself than to her, his voice tinged with curiosity. Jasmine's heart caught in her throat. This was the moment she had feared and hoped for simultaneously, the moment when her father's identity could shift everything. Marcus Carter, head of the FAA, was a man whose influence in aviation safety and policy was widely respected, known to command attention wherever his name appeared. News moved quickly through the network of personnel in the airport, and soon whispers began to circulate. Jasmine could sense the subtle shift in energy around her. The air that had felt heavy with tension and humiliation was now charged with quiet anticipation. Officer Reynolds, who had earlier carried himself with an air of smug authority, faltered slightly, as though he had just realized that the rules had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The truth of her identity, once hidden, now stood between her and further mistreatment. Jasmine felt a spark of hope, fragile but undeniable, flicker within her chest. It was as if the universe had tilted slightly in her favor, offering her a path toward balance and recognition after the unfairness she had endured. For the first time since the encounter began, Jasmine felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. The humiliation, though still present, was met now with the possibility of validation, a recognition that what had happened to her was wrong. The supervisor asked a few calm, professional questions, not with the tone of suspicion, but with an intent to understand. Each response Jasmine gave was measured, firm, and composed, reinforcing the undeniable truth. She had been treated unjustly. As she watched Officer Reynolds exchange uncertain glances with other staff members, the hope inside Jasmine grew stronger. She realized that this moment, this delicate balance of truth, recognition, and authority, could become the turning point. The unfairness that had weighed so heavily on her chest began to shift into something more tangible, The promise that injustice could be addressed, that her dignity could be restored, and that accountability could be enforced. Walking toward the boarding gate with the supervisor's attention quietly supporting her, Jasmine felt a cautious optimism bloom. It was not relief, not yet, but the recognition that hope was possible, that fairness might finally assert itself. For the first time since the encounter began, she believed that the truth, her truth, had the power to change the course of the morning, and perhaps in a small but meaningful way, the course of much more. By the time Jasmine reached her gate, the atmosphere around her had changed. The energy of the terminal, once tense and heavy with unspoken judgments, now felt lighter, tinged with a quiet acknowledgment that the wrongs of earlier had been recognized. Officer Reynolds, the same man who had singled her out, was nowhere in sight. Word had circulated quickly among the airport staff. He had been formally reprimanded and scheduled for sensitivity training. The network of personnel, normally focused solely on routine procedures, had begun to discuss the morning's events in hushed, thoughtful tones. Jasmine could hear snippets of conversation from behind counters, phrases like unacceptable and reviewed immediately floating through the air. It was a subtle but powerful confirmation that her complaint had been heard, that accountability had begun. Her phone buzzed, and when she saw the name on the screen, a familiar warmth surged through her chest. It was her father, Marcus Carter. She answered with a soft, measured, "Hi, Dad." But before she could say more, his voice filled the line, a mixture of pride, concern, and relief. "Jasmine," he began, "I heard what happened. I know that must have been humiliating and frustrating. I'm so proud of how you handled yourself." His words wrapped around her like a protective embrace, the connection bridging the gap of distance and time. She felt a swell of emotion, gratitude, reassurance, and an undeniable sense of validation. Even though the morning had been filled with indignity, hearing her father acknowledge her courage transformed her experience. The ordeal, humiliating as it had been, had ignited something in Jasmine, a spark of determination she had not anticipated. She realized that confronting injustice did not require a title, a badge, or an authority figure standing beside her. Even in moments of apparent powerlessness, a single voice could create ripples, bring attention to wrongdoing, and inspire change. She had stood firm, clear, and calm, even when the situation seemed stacked against her, and now that resilience was tangible, visible in the subtle shifts around her. That realization filled her with a quiet pride, a sense of empowerment that began to replace the anger that had dominated the morning. Boarding the plane, Jasmine felt a calm clarity settle over her. The engines roared to life, the plane began to move, and she pressed her forehead gently against the window, looking out over the city sprawling below. The streets and buildings glimmered in the soft morning light, a reminder that the world outside the airport terminal continued to move forward, just as she would. Relief coursed through her, but it was mingled with something stronger, an inner resolve, a renewed faith in the power of standing up for oneself and others. Her anger, once a searing, almost overwhelming force, had transformed into determination. As the plane lifted into the sky, Jasmine reflected on the day's events, seeing them not as merely a personal ordeal, but as a story that carried lessons for everyone. One person's courage could catalyze change, one voice could demand recognition of fairness, and dignity could be reclaimed even in the face of systemic bias. She imagined the story spreading through friends, colleagues, and perhaps even beyond, and how it might serve as a reminder that standing firm against unfairness could inspire others to act similarly. Her experience had been painful, yes, but it had also become a source of empowerment and hope, a narrative in which justice, even if delayed, was achievable. As the city below shrank into a mosaic of lights and streets, Jasmine felt her spirit lift. The turbulence of the morning, the humiliation, the sharp sting of injustice, they had all contributed to a personal victory, not one defined by confrontation alone, but by composure, resilience, and the courage to assert her truth. In that moment, she understood that triumph was not merely the absence of wrongdoing, it was the assertion of dignity in the face of it. And with that realization, Jasmine knew she had become a quiet force of inspiration, proof that integrity, courage, and hope could rise above even the most discouraging circumstances, leaving a lasting mark, not only on herself, but on all who witnessed her resolve.